The gunmetal gray hull of the Seraph's Talon cut through the void, silent as death. Inside, Captain Elias Voss adjusted the targeting scanner on his wrist display, watching the red blips that marked the enemy's patrol routes. The Zelnari facility below sprawled across the barren surface of Chorus 4, its jagged architecture stark against the planet's ashen rock. It had taken months to locate this facility, one of many suspected to house human prisoners. Voss turned to his squad, the elite Spectre unit, their armor darkened for the mission. Sergeant Lillian Rourke checked her pulse rifle, her jaw set in grim determination. Next to her, Lieutenant Dax Harlow pulled his visor down, his expression unreadable. They all knew the stakes. The war between humanity and the Zelnari had been waged in the shadows for years, a series of border skirmishes in contested territories. But if the intelligence was correct, if human prisoners were being held and experimented on, this was no longer a Cold War. Drop zone in 60 seconds, the pilot's voice crackled over comms. Voss exhaled slowly, forcing himself into the cold clarity of combat readiness. He activated his neural link to the squad, their vitals appearing in his HUD. No mistakes. We go in, get our people, and get out. The drop pod released them in silence, the stealth field masking their descent. As they touched down in the dust, the facility loomed before them, its obsidian walls pulsing faintly with alien energy. Rourke moved ahead, planting an explosive charge on the service hatch. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. A muffled boom sent shockwaves through the ground, and they slipped inside the breach. The corridors were eerily silent, lit by an unnatural green glow from the organic wiring lining the walls. The air was thick, humid, carrying a metallic tang that set Voss's teeth on edge. They moved in formation, weapons sweeping for threats. Then they found the first chamber. The stench hit first, something acrid and wrong like burning flesh and rotting meat. Voss's grip on his rifle tightened as he stepped inside. Stasis pods lined the walls, each filled with a viscous fluid, distorted figures suspended within. Human figures. A figure stirred, its eyes snapping open, mouth opening in a silent scream. Harlow cursed under his breath. The man inside the pod was barely recognizable, his skin translucent, veins darkened by something unnatural. The moment he saw them, his hands slammed against the glass, frantic, pleading. "Get him out," Rourke hissed, already moving toward the console. The moment she touched it, alarms howled through the corridors. The walls pulsed red. The Zelnari knew they were here. The pod cracked open, spilling fluid as the prisoner collapsed forward. Voss caught him, barely registering how light he was. Sunken eyes darted wildly, mouth opening and closing as if forming words he couldn't quite push out. Then a sickening realization dawned. The prisoner wasn't reaching for help. He was clawing at his own throat. His body convulsed violently. Black veins spread from his skin like writhing tendrils. His eyes darkened, pupils vanishing into an abyss of ink. Then, with a final, shuddering breath, he collapsed. Silence. Voss stared at the corpse, jaw tightening. Rourke turned away, her fingers pressing into her rifle's grip hard enough to turn her knuckles white. They weren't keeping prisoners. They were testing something. Harlow moved to another console, his fingers flying over the alien interface. A holographic display shimmered to life, revealing data logs, Zelnari experiments. He played one, a human woman, strapped to a surgical slab, eyes darting wildly. A Zelnari scientist spoke in their guttural, insectal language as mechanical limbs descended, cutting into her abdomen. Her screams filled the chamber. The file ended. Another began, and another, each more horrifying than the last. Rourke turned sharply, her face pale. "Shut it off." Harlow hesitated, then complied. Voss inhaled deeply, centering himself. He reached for his calm command. "This is Spectre 1. We have confirmation. The Zelnari are executing prisoners, experimenting on them. We have footage. Silence on the line. Then a voice, tight with barely contained fury. Understood. Get out. Now. The facility trembled as the first detonations hit. Their extraction had begun, but Voss knew, as he led his squad back toward the breach, that something had changed tonight. The war humanity had been trying to avoid was over. It had just begun. The war declaration came in the form of fire. The Horizon Spear, a dreadnought the size of a city, drifted into position above Zelnari colony Zorash. The planet had no military installations, no war fleets, only civilians and a few garrisons. That didn't matter anymore. Humanity's mercy had been spent in the bloodied cells of Chorus 4. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge, watching as targeting solutions lit up across the holo display. He had seen the recordings from the Zelnari facility. He had felt the cold, gnawing rage of every soldier, every leader who had watched helplessly as their kind was butchered. No one debated retaliation. No one spoke of negotiations. The United Coalition military had given a single, unyielding order: annihilation. The comms officer looked up, awaiting confirmation. Voss gave a slow nod. Fire. Silence. Then a sound like the world cracking open. Kinetic rods, simple, unyielding slugs of tungsten the size of skyscrapers, fell from orbit, punching through Zorash's surface with the force of small suns. Firestorms erupted across the colony as impact shockwaves flattened cities. The planet's crust buckled. The first strike killed millions. The second wave left nothing standing. Voss's hands curled into fists behind his back. This wasn't war. It was extermination. No alarm sounded. No enemy ship scrambled to retaliate. The Zelnari hadn't expected this. They had spent years underestimating humanity, believing their skirmishes were little more than minor border conflicts. They had seen humans as cautious, hesitant, unwilling to embrace total war. They had been wrong. The holo display flickered, bringing up a transmission from Fleet Admiral Marcus Rivik. His face was carved from stone, his eyes unreadable. Zorash is gone. Confirmed civilian losses. A tactical officer responded, voice hollow. Total population estimated at 1.2 billion. Survivors negligible. A heavy silence settled over the bridge. They had done it. They had erased an entire world. And yet, Voss felt nothing but the weight of inevitability. Admiral Rivik exhaled, then straightened. The next wave moves immediately. Target. The comms console crackled. A priority transmission cut through the feed, and for the first time, an alien face appeared on the screen. A Zelnari official, cloaked in shimmering red, stared back at them. His elongated features, usually unreadable to human eyes, held something unmistakable. Fear. The alien's mandibles clicked, his voice a distorted rasp. Humans, you do not understand the war you are bringing upon yourselves. Voss spoke before Rivik could. We understand perfectly. The Zelnari hesitated, his translucent eyelids blinking in rapid succession. You are not like before. You... The transmission cut. No farewell. No final plea. The Zelnari had nothing left to say. Rivik turned to the bridge. Execute the next strike. As the Horizon Spear reoriented for its next target, Voss turned to Lieutenant Harlow. How are the ground forces? Harlow checked his tablet, his brow furrowing. The first wave secured the wreckage. No resistance. The second wave... He hesitated. Voss narrowed his eyes. What? The second wave found survivors. Zelnari civilians, hiding in underground tunnels. Thousands of them. A beat of silence. Then Rourke, leaning against the bulkhead, exhaled. Orders. Voss didn't need to check. The directive was clear. No survivors. But something in Harlow's expression made Voss pause. He had known the man for years, fought alongside him in endless battles. Harlow had never questioned orders before. They're not soldiers, Captain, Harlow murmured. Voss considered that. Considered the faces in the recordings, the human prisoners screaming as they were carved apart. He looked at Harlow and spoke evenly. Neither were ours. Harlow said nothing. The orders were sent. The ground teams complied. No survivors. Hours later, as the fleet moved toward its next target, Voss found himself staring at the scorched remains of Zorash through the observation window. He should have felt something. Guilt, satisfaction, anything. But there was only the cold certainty that this was far from over. The Zelnari homeworld loomed ahead, a sapphire jewel encased in a lattice of defensive platforms. It was a fortress world, the heart of their empire, and humanity had come to burn it. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Horizon Spear, watching as his fleet emerged from slipspace, engines burning bright against the void. Hundreds of ships spread into formation. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, carriers brimming with dropships. The sheer scale of humanity's war machine was staggering. This was no raid. This was extermination. The comms crackled. Fleet Admiral Marcus Revik's voice came through, steady as ever. Begin the assault. A moment later, the void erupted. Torpedoes streaked through the black, leaving contrails of burning atmosphere as they slammed into Zelnari defenses. Kinetic slugs tore through orbital platforms, shattering them like glass. The enemy fleet scrambled to respond, their ships sleek and organic, darting between human fire. They were fast, but speed meant nothing against overwhelming firepower. Voss gripped the railing as a Zelnari cruiser exploded just beyond the viewport, its burning remains tumbling into the planet's gravity well. Status: Lieutenant Dax Harlow scanned the hollow display, his brow furrowed. Enemy fleet is buckling, but they're throwing everything at us. We have casualties across multiple vectors. Voss exhaled slowly. It was expected. No war was won without blood. Drop the ground forces. The Horizon Spear's hangars opened, spilling thousands of drop pods into the upper atmosphere. Human troops descended like falling meteors, their exocets shielding them from the inferno of re-entry. The Zelnari had prepared for an orbital siege, but they hadn't expected an immediate ground invasion. Sergeant Lillian Rourke's pod hit the surface hard, shock absorbers barely compensating for the impact. She was already moving before the hatch fully opened, rifle raised, boots kicking up dirt as she joined her squad. The battlefield was chaos. Zelnari infantry swarmed from underground bunkers, their weapons emitting searing energy bolts that cut through the smoke-choked air. Rourke's squad pressed forward, gunning down anything that moved. The enemy fought with desperation, their movements frantic. These weren't trained soldiers. They were conscripts, workers, civilians forced into battle. But that didn't stop them from trying to kill her. She tore through them without hesitation. The war had changed her, like it had changed all of them. There was no room for mercy anymore. She heard Harlow's voice crackle over the squad comms. Rourke, we need support at the East Trench. They're holding the line. She wiped a streak of blood from her visor. On my way. The battlefield stretched before her, a smoking ruin of shattered cities and burning alien bodies. The Zelnari were losing, but they weren't surrendering. Then the sky changed. A piercing shriek erupted from the heavens, rattling her skull. The air thickened, a low vibration humming through her armor. For a split second, everything felt wrong, like the world itself had twisted. Then the first human soldier dropped. Then another, and another. Their armor was intact. Their weapons were loaded, but their bodies convulsed, their veins darkening, eyes turning black. One of them, Corporal Rains, let out a strangled gasp before collapsing, blood trickling from his mouth. Rourke's stomach turned. What the hell is this? Harlow's voice came through, tight with fear. Bioweapon. They're using something, some kind of frequency attack. Voss's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back. Now. But it was too late. The Zelnari counterattack surged forward, cutting down the disoriented human forces. Whatever they had unleashed was working. Soldiers screamed as their own bodies betrayed them. Some turned their weapons on themselves, their minds cracking under the onslaught. Rourke gritted her teeth. dragging Harlow behind cover as a wave of enemy fire tore through their position. "Command, do you read? We need extraction." Silence. Then, finally, a voice. Not human, not Zelnari. Something worse. "You have brought death to our worlds," it whispered. "Now we bring it to yours." The transmission ended, and above them, the human fleet began to burn. The stars above Zelnari Prime burned with the wreckage of shattered fleets. What had begun as humanity's triumphant assault had twisted into something else, something raw and desperate. The alien bioweapon had crippled their forces, turning soldiers into corpses before they could even fire their weapons. The Zelnari had not intended to win. They had intended to make victory cost more than humanity could bear. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Horizon Spear. The scent of smoke and scorched metal thick in the air. Damage reports scrolled across the holo display. Entire battalions wiped out, warships lost, ground forces stranded. The Zelnari counterattack had broken them. Yet, humanity still stood. Fleet Admiral Marcus Revik appeared on the comlink, his expression a mask of exhaustion. "We have one shot at this, Captain. We take the capital, or we lose everything." Voss understood. The war had consumed entire systems, reduced planets to cinders. But if they failed to break the Zelnari here, there would be no peace, only endless bloodshed. He turned to Lieutenant Harlow, whose face was drawn and pale. "Prep the final assault. We end this." On the surface, the city of Varesh, the Zelnari capital, was crumbling. Fires raged in the streets, smoke choking the sky. Sergeant Lillian Rourke moved through the ruins, rifle steady, boots crunching over glass and charred remains. Her squad had been whittled down to a handful. The bioweapon had spared no one. They had no time to grieve. Ahead, the alien palace loomed, a towering structure of black stone and pulsing green light, the heart of the Zelnari government. If their leader still lived, they were inside. She activated her comm, Harlow. "We're in position." The lieutenant's voice came through, clipped and tired. "Copy. No reinforcements. We're all that's left." They had come with legions. They would finish this with a handful. Rourke signaled her team forward. They moved through the shattered gates, weapons raised. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of alien machinery. At the far end of the chamber, the last of the Zelnari High Command stood waiting. The Supreme Chancellor of the Zelnari stepped forward. His exoskeletal armor shimmered, his mandibles clicking as he regarded the humans before him. "You have slaughtered my people," he said, his voice hollow. "Now you come to finish the last of us." Rourke tightened her grip on her rifle. "You did the same to ours." The Chancellor's black eyes flickered. "You think this is justice? This is survival. We saw what you were. We feared what you could become." Voss's voice cut through the comms. "Eliminate the target." Rourke hesitated. The war had been brutal, merciless. She had killed without question, burned cities without regret. But standing here, in the final moments, she wondered if they had become something worse than what they had fought against. Harlow exhaled beside her. "We end this now, or we fight another war." The Chancellor closed his eyes, accepting his fate. A single shot rang out. The Zelnari ruler collapsed, his blood pooling across the floor. His guards did not fight. There was no one left to fight. The war was over. Back on the bridge of the Horizon Spear, Voss listened as the last Zelnari transmission was intercepted. It was not a plea, not a surrender, only a single message, broadcast to whatever survivors remained. "Remember us?" Voss closed his eyes. Humanity had won, but in the silence that followed, he wondered what had truly been lost.